Okay, give me a second. We'll go ahead and get this started. So thank you everyone for attending. My name is Brian Coester. I'm the CEO of Coester Valuation Management Services. I am also a real estate appraiser. And the goal today of this webinar is to go over the appraisal process and help everyone kind of explain the appraisal process to your realtor and borrower. The appraisal is one of those things to where it is more or less a mixed nut of confusion, but also something that sometimes get underappreciated during the inspection process. There are so many controls in place now when it comes to the appraisal that a lot of times people assume that the appraisal is sort of like an unnecessary evil, but that's really not the case. If you look at the appraiser, what the appraiser does is provide very valuable insight to the market conditions, local market conditions, and make sure that you not only provide valuable insight when it comes to the local market, but also provide to the macro market, right? You can say, well, I got this deal, and the appraisal, killed the deal. Well, no, those are the controls in place that are needed to help really establish a healthy market. Not every deal, if it was up to every lender, if it was up to every not every lender, if it was up to every transaction to go through, and if it would go through with every transaction with no controls in place, you would really see an unstable market very, very, very quickly. And if you look at, let's say, other industries, without some type of control in place to know a proper pricing engine, things tend to get overinflated very quickly. So what I'm going to try to do is just explain, being educated about this is probably the single most important thing, because ultimately everyone's dealing in the same arena. Very few purchases or refinances are done without an appraisal. More often than not now, when it comes to the lending process, the appraisal piece is one of the most important pieces to getting the deal done. And as we head into 2017 with a very, 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 very heavy purchase market, you're going to see more and more and more appraisers being needed for these purchase transactions and good quality stuff. So the best part about this is that there are things that you can do to help not only you, but help your customers, help your realtors, help your borrowers, help your company have a better process. And we've seen, so I luckily have the benefit of seeing the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to mortgage companies and banks, as well as production staff, appraisers, and knowing, okay, what works really well as far as the process, what doesn't work that well, and maybe help explain that, but then also kind of just go through the appraisal process itself. So what is an appraisal? Well, what we're going to cover today is what an appraiser looks for in a home, how lenders' guidelines affect appraisals, what they're required to report back versus observing, how the inspection process takes place, SHA guidelines and overlays, appraiser communications, comparable search, and then the value rebuttal process. So what is an appraisal? An appraisal is an estimation of the market value of a particular home that is needed during the loan process. There are still a lot of appraisals, and I know when I was appraising full-time, that I appraised both in the mortgage lending industry and outside the mortgage lending industry. Appraisers are used in a variety of ways. They're used for tax appeals, they're used for date of death valuations, they're used for the divorce cases, they're used for estate planning, they're used for just general market value. Mortgage lending is only one piece of the pie when it comes to the appraisals repertoire, right? So when I was doing appraisals full-time, I would do some work for lenders, some work for attorneys, some work for divorce divorce people, and some work for estate planning, some work for date of death. I mean, you sort of do a variety of work. So the idea of the appraisal for the mortgage lending process is what we're going to cover, but we're not going to cover the appraisal process as a whole. So to become an appraiser currently, and they're in the process of changing this a little bit, but I just put this out there. As some of you guys experienced over the last couple of months, you probably experienced a big backlog in appraisals, and in certain areas there's still that case, to where in some areas in Colorado or Washington. And one of the reasons why is the barrier for entry. It's very, very, very time consuming to become an appraiser. So you need a 4-year college education, a 300 hours of tested education that are classroom hours, 3,000 logged field experience hours. And again, they're in the process of changing this now to be a little less, but this is what it was this is, I think to a certain extent, it's a large part where it is in most areas. 3,000 logged field experience hours, pass a criminal background check, 2-year apprenticeship. So you have to work for somebody for 2 years, take a very lengthy test. I think it's about 250 questions, score 80% or more, and then you can become an appraiser. And then there's a separate certification that you need for FHA. So that is all just so that you can get and become an appraiser. Now, let's say, for instance, to be an appraiser for Flagstar, you need 5 years of experience from the time you get your license. So that means you're 7 years in to this thing before you can do appraisals for Flagstar. That's why some of the investors who sell a Flagstar and that Flagstar eligible appraiser list is somewhat hard to deal with, because it drastically limits the number of appraisers. Flagstar is a great company, but it's one of those things. So that is what it takes to become an appraiser. And that's why when you think about, well, what are they doing with all these appraisals? They're taking forever. You know, we get new appraisers in the market. Well, this is one of the reasons why. This is one of the reasons why there's been less appraisers coming in the market, is because it's very lengthy. They're trying to loosen it up now, but this is definitely one of the reasons. So what is the appraisal process? So there's a variety of what is the appraisal process? So there's a variety, but at a macro level, essentially what you're trying to do is solve a problem, right? So somebody needs a value for a property, okay, in this market area. So I need to have value on 112 Johnson Street. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather, record, and verify all the data. So the first thing I'm going to do is gather regional data, right? So I'm going to look at Montgomery County, Maryland, Washington, D.C. Then I'm going to look at the city, the individual city. And then I'm going to look at the neighborhood, the individual neighborhood, right? And that'll give me the general sense of what I'm getting into, right? So if I'm going to do a townhouse in Montgomery County, and here's the neighborhood, is it big area or small area? Is it big houses or small houses? Is it rural properties on farms, or is it a residential area? Is it an urban city or a agricultural use? So you want to get in the general area. Then you're going to look at the specific data. So the address, the subject sites, the improvements. It's a townhouse, it's a condo, it's a 5,000 square foot property on 140 acres, right? So the specific improvements, because what happens is by knowing all this information, then it determines what I have to do. I mean, if it's 10,000 square foot property on 50 acres, I'm probably going to bring somebody with me to help do this, because it's going to take a couple hours, or may take a whole day to be there. If it's a townhouse that's 1,500 square feet, it may be much less. It may be much less to do, and it may take much less time. But all that is a part of the process. So sometimes this is what an appraiser is first going to do when they start looking at things. And then they're going to get data for each approach. Now, most of the time, the sales comparison approach is what is used 80% of the time in the mortgage lending industry. The income approach and the building cost approach it should be used more. It's not used more. It should be used more, but that's not my argument. And so what I'm going to start doing also is gathering data. I'm going to look at, if it's a new construction, I'm going to look at building data. If it's a older home in an established area, maybe the sales comparison approach. If it's a rental property and I need to do a 1004 or a 1007 rental income approach, I'm going to look at income data. and start looking at rental properties, but I'm going to start really gathering my data, because what I want to know is what I'm getting into, right? And so all this data is gathered online. It's gathered through files that you have from previous appraisal reports that you've done. I mean, what you're really just doing is trying to say, okay, I'm doing an appraisal on a 10,000 square foot property that's on the water, okay? And I need to gather all the data on waterfront properties. I need to look at depth of the water. I need to start really getting all this information together, which is very different, okay, than if I'm doing a condo in DC on a high-rise building, which the data I need to gather is completely different. I need to gather parking space data. I need to gather information on the rentals in the area, because it's more of a competitive market. I need to gather view information and how much the views are selling for. I need to go and look and see if there's any competing new condos in the market. I need to gather building information. I need to gather other building information. So it really just depends. So a part of the appraisal process is determining the scope of work, right? So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but the slide should have been different. But so I'm looking at all this information. I've gathered all of this data, and a part of this process, and they kind of go intertwined, is the scope of work, right? And most of the time, the scope of work comes first, and that's usually determined by the client. But at the same time, they're kind of intertwined, where the deeper I dig, the more I find. So if I'm going to go and do an appraisal on a property in, a 10,000 square foot property, the scope of work is the appraisal. But at the same time, the more I find in data, I may have to expand the scope of work. I may have to say, now it's on a waterfront property, I need to do an analysis of the depth of the water, or can we have a boat, or if the dock, or if the roof, or, I mean, there's just so many things, flood, there's so many things that need to happen. And the scope of work determines essentially what problem you're solving and what amount of work is necessary to produce credible assignment results, right? And that scope of work is disclosed within the appraisal report. It's actually disclosed within the Fannie Mae form, which we will go over. But the idea is that there's a data analysis part, a data gathering part, but then the scope of work part, which is the goal is to produce credible assignment results. So then what I'm moving into is the appraisal process itself, which I have to determine the highest and best use of the property, right? And so the highest and best use of the property is what you're trying to figure out is what's the maximally productive, physically possible, economically feasible, and legal, right? So if I have a house that's 1,100 square feet on 3 acres in an area where all the homes are 10,000 square feet on 1 acre, and it's zoned at 1 house per acre, then the highest and best use is to tear down that 1,100 square foot house and build 3 10,000 square foot houses in that market area, right? And that is something that as an appraiser you run into all the time. This person wants to refinance, right? You go out there and you look at this and you're saying this house shouldn't even be here. And you say, well, Brian, that's not your job. Let's do it. We don't determine that. So the job of the appraiser is just to report back the highest and best use, right? What the lender decides to do with that on their own is completely separate. But at the same time, that's still true, and it would be obvious because there'd be no sales out of 1,100 square foot properties in that market. To estimate the land value, so part of the appraisal, if you see within the cost approach, there's always the land value. And what you're looking for is the contributory value of the land to the subject property. So if the house is worth $500,000 and the land is worth $400,000, that means that the land is worth almost more than the house, right? So the contributory value of the land or the improvements is worth more, almost more than the house. If you run into a situation like in Texas or something where the land is only worth $20,000 and the home is worth $400,000, Well, then the land is a very small percentage, but that gives you an idea if you estimate the land value of the highest and best use in comparison to the overall value. And so what you're going to do is you're going to do both, right? So you're looking at the highest and best use, and sometimes you get a feeling for it, right? So it's not all, it's somewhat of an art and somewhat of a science. And most of the time, I mean 99 out of 100, the highest and best use is as is. Like in a townhouse, it's just as is. Or a condo, it's just as is. But you're still going to do both. Estimate the land value, estimate the value by each of the three approaches. So cost approach, sales comparison approach, income approach. Reconcile the estimated value, and then report the final estimate of value, right? And that is the line that you see right on the bottom with the final reconcile. In the mortgage lending space, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 really now, are the sales comparison approach. And there's positives and negatives to that. The sales comparison approach is good in a normalized market, but at the same time is very manipulatable to interest rate movements. Whereas the cost approach and the income approach are sort of bookends to that. So if you can build a house cheaper and more cost effective than it would be to buy another house, then the best way to approach that house is the cost approach. If the income associated with that home would make it worth more than it would be to build, right, then it may be worth more to do the income approach. There's situations to all, there's proper uses for all of them, especially in today's market. But Fannie, Freddie, all the investors want with the sales comparison approach, primarily due to the fact that they're lending 99 out of 100 to residential homeowners who own residential real estate. So market value. So a part of the process is the market value. So there's different market values associated with each type of appraisal report. So if you wanted to give me a date of death market valuation, could be based on data from 2 years ago. A market value based on a future valuation. Like, so I'm going to value something based on something 6 months, 9 months, 2 years from now. If you look at forecasting, right, you can do a forecast, and you can do a time. There's so many things you can do, but the basic definition, and this is from Fannie and Freddie, and this is what's used in the mortgage lending industry, is the most probable price that a property should bring in a competitive market under conditions of a fair sale, that the buyer and seller each act imprudently, knowledgeably, and assuming the price is not affected by undue stimulus, implicit in the definition of consummation of a sale at a specific date, and passing a title from seller to buyer under conditions whereby the buyer and seller are typically motivated, both parties are well-informed, well-advised, and each acting in their own best interest. A reasonable time is allowed for exposure in the market, payments in U.S. dollars or financials arrangements comparable thereto, and the price represent normal consideration of the property sold, unaffected by special creative financing, sales concessions are granted by anyone associated with the sale. So that is on the Fannie Mae form, and that is what the appraisers use. Now, you can say, well, Brian, then if that's the case, why does Fannie, why does, some of my appraisals have REO properties? Or why do some of my appraisal reports use foreclosures or short sales? Because that may be the market, right? So you're looking at the typical market in that market. And sometimes that is the market area, and that is the market area, and that is what's really going on in that market. And you got to kind of understand that, right? So that is a part of the deal. If in certain markets, foreclosures are the predominant market. The sales concession has become a problem, right? So they know that FHA homes typically sell for a little more because the financing is a little better on the sales concessions, and then also that the down payment's less. So that is usually where they put in some of the concessions into the down payment because of the financing, and they typically sell 2 to 3% more, right? So that's something that they've tried to curtail with the negative adjustments down, because what happens is 2 to 3% over time, and then the whole market's inflated, right? And then you have people who go to sell their home, and then the whole market crashes, right? So you want to be, you can say, well, they're limiting home ownership. Yes, that's one way to look at it. But also, there's a level of where do you stop, right? And that's the balance. And that's where the appraisers come in. They come in and say, okay, this is where we stop, right? Because ultimately, most people aren't in their home forever. They're going to sell it after a couple of years. And with the financing now as high and has been, it's more important than ever to have a very, very accurate appraisal. So market value, this is from Ryan Lindquist on the Sacramento Appraiser blog. What everyone would be willing to pay for it is basically what you're looking at. Not one person, but if 100 people offered to pay for that property, there would be a range, and that range is fairly predictable. And that's what market value is. It's not one buyer, but how much would most buyers pay? So some people say, well, market value is whatever the buyer and seller agree upon, right? That's what the appraisal should be, because that's what the buyer and the seller agree upon. That's one way to look at it. But the problem is that people are motivated by different reasons. Some people need to buy in the house. Some people have the extra cash. Some people, have extenuating circumstances that they need to sell or need to buy. And then they become motivated for different reasons. That is not the definition. That's not typical, right? If you had a whole market made up of that, right, you would have all these scenarios, and there'd be volatility in the market, and it'd be very inconsistent. So the goal is somebody's completely neutral. This is not they're motivated, but they're neutral. They can have these 5 houses. They're going to take the next 60 days to look at these houses. There's a normal supply of houses in the market that they're normally motivated, and this is where the appraisal comes in to say, okay, this is what a typical buyer would pay. So during the appraisal process, there's an inspection, right? And a part of the inspection so we have your market value, we have the scope of work, we have the definition of market value, and then now what the appraiser is going to do is go out and inspect the property, right? So the inspection process is something that is just a part of the appraisal process. I know there's drive-bys, I know there's desktop appraisals, I know those types of things, but the goal is 99 out of 100 will be a full appraisal, interior and exterior inspection. So it's a full interior and exterior inspection of the property. Exterior building sketch with dimensions, so they're going to measure the outside for a condo, they're going to measure the inside. Interior dimensions for a condo. Floor plan, you're calculating gross living area. Street maps, subject maps, and comparables. Neighborhood information and general characteristics, so you're going to kind of drive around the neighborhood for 15, 20 minutes and just get an idea, feel for the neighborhood. An inspection of the comparables from the street, so all the comparables that you're going to see from the street, and it typically takes about an hour to 2 hours, depending on the size and scope of the assignment, right? So that's where the scope of work is so important to when it comes to the appraisal. And again, all of them are a little different. So before the inspection, because one of the problems that we run into, and everyone runs into this now, fee increases, the appraiser, missed this, the appraiser's taking forever, oh, by the way, my borrower needs to fix this, my borrower needs to fix that. And the reality is that all of these things, for the most part, could be avoided if some proactiveness was taken both by the appraiser, the lender, and both by the appraiser, the lender, and then everyone involved, right? So what I always tell our lenders to do is to have their sales team ask these questions before ordering the appraisal, because these are really important. So how many bedrooms do you have? How many bedrooms does your home have? If it's more than 4, right, so 5, 6, probably the property is pretty big or odd. if it's a single-family home and it's less than 2, you got a problem, because one-bedroom homes is a real hard to find. Is your home on acres? If it's a yes, there may be well in septic. There may be other issues with land that you have to try to find comparables in maybe a rural market. What is the size of the home? The size of the home determines a lot of the scope of work and the amount of work needed. Not all areas have MLS, okay? So, and MLSs are typically done at a regional level, some by state, some by county, some by zip code. It just really depends. Some of them are, there is some national MLS, so you can go on Zillow now and get information, but not all areas, right? Like Google, go on Zillow and put in some addresses in some rural areas and nothing comes up. So, or no property characteristics come up. And so sometimes it takes getting to the inspection to even know what you're dealing with. And that's even in some areas that are in more property condensed areas, because of the fact that all information is very available online. So what is the size of your home? Is it on well and septic? Are there any repairs that need to be done to the home? Are there any outbuildings on the property? Does the home have any commercial agricultural use? Is there horses? Does your neighbor have horses? Do you have a farm? Are you making any money? What is the approximate value of your home? So those are some baseline questions that you want to ask. And if you get that, what you're going to do is be able to get, so what you'll be able to do is get the appraiser the proper scope of work, right? And that's important, right? So you have to determine that data that you need, the scope of work, is all going to help. And the quicker you can get that information, the better. Now, I would say about 1 out of 10, this is a real issue, okay? To where you get out to the subject property, because again, tax record information is not always correct, even in today's world. You get out to the subject property and it's completely different than what you thought. It's way bigger, it's way smaller, it's, there's multiple parcels that are split up, and so the property is actually on 50 acres, but the subject's just on 1 in the middle, because they've gifted the land to the county. This type of stuff happens all the time. That's why we have appraisers here on staff to help with these questions. But that's where asking this information ahead of time can prevent a problem. And it can prevent a problem in 2 ways. 1, it'll help with trade disclosures in the LE on any type of possible fee increases. 2, it'll help the appraiser gather proper information before going out and actually help us as an appraisal management company, in conjunction with the appraiser, in conjunction with the lender, establish a proper scope of work. But also, it'll just help set the expectations better. So let's go into FHA, right? So FHA has, so there's an inspection process for they're normal, but FHA has their own overlays, and the FHA overlays are a little bit different, but they're close. And basically, it's just a more beefed up version of your typical inspection process. So, at a minimum, the appraiser must visually inspect the subject property both inside and out, take photos of the property, be included in the loan file, front, side, and rear's home, as well as any value-add improvements such as pool, patio. You're going to get a ton of photos. Take each comparable photo of the comparable, provide a street map, provide photos to show the grade of the lot of its proposed construction, and then there's some other inspection requirements, right? So HUD's primary concern is this, what they call safety, sound, and security, 3 S's. The safetiness, the soundness, and the security of the property. They just want to make sure that the home is livable, that the home is safe, that the home is structurally sound, and that the home is secure. So, for instance, if there's bars on the windows, right, that aren't opening, if there's no window in the bedroom to allow for proper egress and ingress, if there's a fire, if there's lead-based paint, if there's no handrails on the stairs, the heating system may not work properly, right? The roof, so the roof must be good, and the foundation must be must be sound. There's all sort of things that the appraiser must have in place. Now you say, well, Brian, you know, I mean, I'm doing homes, I'm doing appraisals on townhouses in Los Angeles County. Like, why does all this matter? Like, why do we need to go through this whole thing? Because you would be absolutely amazed, I'm just letting you know that, of what people do to their own homes and how, you know, FHA has minimum requirements, and, you know, the smallest keys turn the biggest locks and open up the biggest doors. And you will be amazed at what you find. And it's about that 1 out of 10. Some areas it's more. And especially in the older areas, like if you get into Washington, D.C., if you get into Boston, if you get into areas of Virginia, areas of Baltimore, areas, you know, in Charlotte, or area, you know, any of the older towns, this is becoming, it's a much more of an issue because all the homes have been modified. None of them were built with air conditioning or heat, and they've just been changed by all the homeowners, and you have, you know, issues, right? So no handrail, right? Or no, you know, lead-based paint that nobody found and stuff. So FHA, the appraiser is an observer, but also is going to be look for a lot more things. So he's going to do a head and shoulder inspection of the crawl space and attic. I cannot tell you how many times we've had issues with finals because the crawl space and attic were not available. So this is going to happen all the time. He's going to observe all areas of the home. Airport contour maps. So if the subject's near an airport, they're going to want to know if the subject is in how close, if there's any noise issues, if there's any safety issues. There is designated airport crash landing zones that they have, like somewhere on a map, that this is where if the plane, you know, is going to crash near the airport, this is where they crash, right? So we want to make sure subject's not there. Sump pump in good working order, 2 years of roof life, and then legal non-conforming. So can the subject be rebuilt in current use, right? In your areas of transition, right, your Boston, your D.C., your Baltimore, your Philadelphia, to where they're going through gentrification, they're going through revitalization of certain neighborhoods, they change zoning to help also change the neighborhood. So you run into a lot of areas to where they have grandfather use that are legal, non-conforming, and some of them can be rebuilt, and some of them can't, right? It's just like a part of the deal. And sometimes, you know, you go to a property, and you know what? If something happened, this thing would burn down, or, you know, they can't change this, and it cannot be rebuilt in its current use. It was torn down. So the FHA doesn't want to loan that. Photos of every room, and then consider the 3 approaches to value. So you're going to get a map sort of like this that shows the general room layout with the you know, airport and the, you know, garage and the carport and storage and, you know, living room, bedroom, bathroom, those type of things. You're going to get a map with comparables, and there's going to be some type of street map, subject of the photos, you know, subject street, subject rear, comp, adjustments, grid, addendum, and then some sort of reconciliation. There's a sample of a URAR form. This is where the sales comparison approach goes, and what you're going to see is within that you'll see a lot of adjustments. You'll see, and we don't have time to go into all of this, but this basically is reporting back the data, right? So this is not actually the appraisal. This is just a form. The appraisal is done beforehand, and the appraisal is done. The appraisal is done beforehand, and the appraisal is done in a situation where it's almost like the appraisal is done by the appraiser, and then the form is sent to the client, right? So there's, outside the mortgage lending industry, these forms really don't exist. The Appraisal Institute has a form that they use for general appraisal practices, but when you can do an appraisal on a piece of paper that's just signed and certified. You don't actually have to produce a form, take photos, do all this other stuff, you know, put the map and all these things. That's all lending overlays. All of that is just mortgage banking lending overlays. It has nothing to do with the appraisal itself. The appraisal is done by the appraiser within his work file, and then they give you the form because that's what the investor, Fannie Mae, and everyone else wants. So some eligible properties, ineligible properties. So you run into all this stuff: funeral homes. You run into non-residential uses. You run into mixed use issues with FHA. You run into environmental hazards. So environmental contaminations, offensive sites, excessive noise, all those things you run into fairly constantly. If there's a well and septic in certain areas, if the connection is considered feasible, it's less than 3% of the appraised value, or if the home's been vacant for 30 days, it may require a well and septic inspection. There's issues with private roads. So if they're private street roads and shared driveways, there needs to be some agreement in place. Each property must have vehicular pedestrian access, and which over emergency roads can be. Absence of these may be noted. I mean, we've had issues where we had to get rare, agreements from homeowners, some type of signature for a road maintenance agreement, because it's part of FHA requirement if there's a private road. And again, in metropolitan areas, not as big of a deal. You get on the rural areas, there is a lot of private roads. Any habitable living unit or added detached single-family dwelling must be noted. And this is something, if the utilities are turned off, the appraiser must turn at a later date. If you have a purchase, a lot of times they turn these things off. The appraiser is going to have to come back. All habitable rooms must have a reheat source, and then they must be tested. So they're going to test the heat, and if it's below 50 degrees, they're not going to test the air conditioning because it may harm the system, but they're going to observe all of these systems to appear functioning. On flat roofs, they don't have to do an inspection, but for any of the slanted roofs, they're going to want to see that a 2-year lifespan is required. Flood areas near airports, some condos, instability. I mean, all these things the appraisers are considering when it comes to determining the market value, or determining the appraisers. So what I want to do now is sort of open up. Let me just open up this to questions. I know we have a lot of questions already, but the goal is to make this as informative as possible. And I know we have, the slides will be available after as well. What I could also do is go through sort of a mock data search, right? And I think that would be very helpful in trying to determine if so this is MRIS information, right? And so what an appraiser is going to do, right? And this is let's just pull this up. Let's use this one. What appraiser is going to do is pull up an address similar to this, right? And this has information on the subject. This has a tax code. This gives you site size, building information, gives you land value. This is the assessments records, block square footage, all those types of things. And so if you're in the appraiser's job, what the first thing you're going to do is look at this information and get a idea of what problem you're willing to solve and what actually is going on in that market. So you see here there's a transfer. It looked like it was just between, it looked like it was a homeowner between a trust. You look information, the taxes. You're going to look at the neighborhood photos, right? So here's the neighborhood photos. Here's information on neighbors and what's going on. Here's what the neighbors look like, and then you can look at the property history. So has it ever been listed? No, right? And that's really what information is going to go into the market, right? So as an appraiser, I'm here. I know nothing else but what I'm looking at right now. And then you can say, okay, what is going on in that particular market, right? So you have, let's just use this. And let's just use for sale. I'm not going to go through this whole thing with you guys, but I'm going to go through it a little bit. So it's a detached house. You got homes that sell for $379,000 to $1.2 million in that market, right? So a big range, right? And that's where, from this point going forward, right, is where from this point going forward is where the appraisal process is starting to begin, right? Where they're going to start to, let me see my screen real quick to fix this. Okay, let me see. Okay, there you go. So from this part going forward, if you can see my screen now, is when really the appraisal process begins. So they're going to look at the market. They're going to look at the market area. They're going to look at the subject. They're going to pull the tax record. They're going to look at let's pull this here. They're going to look at, so let's pull this up here. Okay. So here's the subject property we were just looking at. And so from this point forward, what they're going to do is they're going to look here. So you got a 2,300 square foot property. I don't have a subject. If you can see here, you have a lot of, it looks like it's in different sections. I don't know what the subject looks like now. It looks like it's a 2-story with a basement based on the building use. So it's probably a colonial. The basement square footage is 1,400 square feet, so 2,300 square feet, right? You have a property that's on 0.286 acres. And then you have a house that was built in 1977, so an older home. So then what you're going to do is say, okay, well, here's the market. Here's the market area. Here's what I have in place now. And here's the amount of comparables we have. So we have lot size, we have tax living area. So our subject property was 2,300 square feet, right? So the first thing I can do is start looking at homes. And again, this is before I go out. I have no idea what this subject looks like, right? So this is where in this market for 2,300 square foot homes, I got homes from 650, right? So let's say around 2,300 square feet. So let's say 2,000 square feet. I got homes 599, 650, 750, 650, 528, 650, 575, 77, 725, and then let's just start, and then 899, right? And again, I have no idea what this subject looks like, right? So you could say my subject's 2,300 square feet, homes between 2,000 square feet and 2,800 square feet are ones that I would be considering, right? Again, it's not 100% done, but it's considering. And then you can say, okay, within that market, you have a range. So you got a range between 428 and 899. Again, I don't know anything else to know about this property, right? I can maybe pull it up on Zillow, right, or pull it up on Google. But at the same time, that information's fairly inaccurate. And when I say inaccurate is, you can say, well, Brian, I use the information all the time, and it's fine. That's fine, right? And you can do that. But you would be surprised if you actually relied on the information on how off it really is. But we're going to go ahead and look at this just to see. Let's see. and we're going to click this, right? So you're here, right? So this is the subject property that we've decided. We just pulled up an address, and this is the subject property. And what you can see here is split level, right? So the colonial was wrong, right? So it says 2-story with basement. So I thought it was a colonial. It's not. It's a split level. You got 2-car garage. You got a nice little house, right? You look into the court. You can kind of poke around on this, right? So then you start saying, okay, well, here are my just baseline areas, right? These are my active sales in the market. I got this house, which is a foreclosure, right? You can see REO, bank owned, looks nasty, right? You can see this here. I've got this house, which is a potential short sale. So that gives me a negative right there. So this says, okay, I got 3 homes, an REO, potential short sale, and an REO. But it also says, okay, well, let's look at the other side of the market. So then here, I start getting into bigger and bigger homes, right? So now we got a problem because all the sales just right away that look like the subject that are for sale, right? Your split level. This one, nah. But then you start getting into bigger and bigger homes. This is not comparable, right? So then as the appraiser, again, I have no idea, right? I'm just walking out. So then I'm going to say, okay, well, let me see if I can expand my market, right? Because now I have to go out and expand more. And that's where the appraisal process, and again, this would take hours and hours and hours. That's where the appraisal process and the market really start coming into play, where, people say, well, it's just as easy as, just pulling up some information off Zillow and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, now let's go and look at sold comparables, right? So you could say close date, just use 6 months ago. Results. Okay, so you look at this, and let's just start looking through and just see what we find, right? Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to start just looking through and just seeing what we find. We're going to poke around. So I need detached houses. We know that. We know we need a basement, right? So we know that. So let's go ahead and look at this a little bit. And let's just start poking around. So it is a big poke around. I mean, you're just poking around. So that's kind of like the subject a little bit, right? Maybe, maybe not. Then you could say no, right? Yes, maybe, no, yes. So this looks just like the subject. And a large, and it's in the subject's neighborhood and sold in June, right? So you're poking, right? And then all of a sudden you're getting to the other side of the fence, right? Where now you're starting to get it out of the market. So the only one I really have, and you can see now what appraisers go through every day, the only one I really have that's any good is this here. It's sale. But then when I get to my listings, I got 3 foreclosures or potential short sales, but none of them that look like this. And that's when the appraisal process begins. And how to figure out, well, what is forecasting in that market? What does a typical buyer and seller go for in that market? What does a typical homeowner look for in that market? What is going on when it comes to new construction? What is an REO market, or is there a ZAT market? Is there this market or is that market? I mean, all of those things really start to come into play now because you're trying to figure this out. And that's where you say, well, please provide 2 comparables and 2 listings within 90 days. And where would you find something that looks like this, right? I just pulled the whole MLS, right? Where would you find that? And then I'd have to expand out the search, right? So I'm already at about a mile. And then you could say, okay, within 3 miles, but then you start getting into different markets. So you got some major intersections here. You got, so really you would only do this market here. And that's when it becomes a little more complicated, right? And then you can see, again, the appraisers are doing these all day, every day, and are really focusing on providing really good, accurate, but the information is not always there, right? And so when you're saying, okay, well, Brian, I got homeowners, I got realtors, I got inspectors, I have all these people who are constantly complaining about appraisers and how they don't have the information, they don't know what they're doing, and this and this and that, and all this stuff. You got to realize is that they're trying to hit a moving target, and it's not as easy or as simple. Even if when you look at contracts for this particular property, I mean, what am I going to use for contracts? I got nothing that looks like it. I could probably get away with justifying using this at some level, considering how the proximity and how close it is to the market. But other than that, I mean, it'd be very difficult for me to use something like this, right, or something like that for that market, considering the size and the scope of the property and the subject. So you have to. It really becomes a dance, and that's when they say, the appraisal process is art as well as science, and this is exactly why, is that you're really dealing with situations where, can I use this one? Can I? An REO for $100,000 less is the only listing. Can I use this one? Maybe, right? Maybe. It's a stretch, but maybe as a listing. And then you can say, well, what about the rest of these? These are obviously too big. And that's where, again, when you talk about the appraisal process to your lenders, the appraisal process to your realtors, the appraisal process to, everyone you're involved with, it is a very lengthy, extensive, comprehensive process that it's intangible, but also tangible, in the sense of that the tangible results are the final report, but to get there is very messy. It's a very messy process to get there. So thank you, everyone. This will be published. I did record this. It's about all the time we have today, but I appreciate everyone's involvement, and I appreciate the questions we have. I will upload this to the CoesterVMS YouTube channel and send out a link, and thank you very much. So have a good one.